Welcome to Change Starts Here, a Franklin Covey education podcast for K through 12 leaders driving meaningful change through bold thinking, real stories, and proven strategies for lasting impact. Now, here are your hosts, Kim Yaris and Eve Miller.
Hey, listeners, welcome back to Change Starts Here, Research Conversations. I'm Kim Yaris, and today my colleague, Eve Miller, and I are talking about something that are on the minds of many educators, family engagement. So, Eve, you had just completed a deep dive into this topic, which made
Yeah.
me curious. Why this topic and why now?
Yeah, this was an opportunity to speak to some Leader in Me schools, some Leader in Me legacy schools, and the topic that they requested was family engagement. They felt like, here are these great schools, and what they really wanted to learn more about and learn some strategies about is family engagement. And as I unpack the topic in the research, it feels like this is something that keeps coming up, right? We know this, but it's really what's fascinating to me about family engagement is it's this topic where there's always this push to like, how do we engage families more? We think we know some of the ways, but a lot of the accepted knowledge is not actually all that practical or useful or effective. So I was really surprised by that to learn that there's just a disconnect between what is actually effective and what the majority of schools are doing that feels effective. So I think that is why they ultimately wanted me to come is to say, okay, as you look at the research, is there a disconnect? And indeed, there was a disconnect.
Okay. So you saying the word disconnect,
Yeah,
brings to mind for me some of what I think about as the common conceptions about engaging families, right? And one of the common conceptions that comes up for me is like families either don't want to engage or they don't have the time to engage, or there's some kind of language barrier or work constraint that gets in the way. And
right.
based on your deep dive, does that track? Is that what bears
Yeah.
out in the research?
Yeah, what you said there to unpack it, there's a few different elements to that I'd love to talk through. So, let's take on that idea of families not wanting to engage. Well, there is really interesting research about, you know, there's quite a bit of it. There's both research on um, the interest that families have in engaging, how much they believe they're engaging, and how much teachers believe they're engaging. And this research is really interesting because it's about perception. So for a teacher, they believe that they are engaging a lot when they are sending out an email. They're sending out to, say, 30 families, right? Um, so when researchers looked at how often the frequency they felt a teacher was engaging with them versus how often the teacher felt they were engaging with the families, there was like a 20% difference in engagement through email. But through phone and through more direct communication, there was a 40% difference where the teachers felt like they were communicating 40% more than the families felt like the teacher was engaging with them. So I just want to point that out that there's some misconception there. You also spoke about some barriers, right? So the barriers was another really interesting area of research where it is true that there are barriers that keep families from being able to engage. And teachers and school leaders will know best what those barriers are for their student population. Um, yeah, shift work, right? Like having language barriers, things like that. Those do all get in the way. But knowing that, what they found is for the schools who know the families that their students, the homes that they come from and the barriers that they are facing to engage, and trusting that the families will engage if they have opportunities and those barriers are taken down. So things like making sure all things are translated, making early contact, two-way communication, which we can get into, um, scheduling things so that they don't fall during the middle of the school day. That's one that drives me crazy. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, it feels like a bias to me of like, hey, I like my job. And I am not a stay-at-home, parent, so I am not able to attend that unless I plan ahead. Anyway, that's a side tangent. You know, there are ways, like, so scheduling it for, later evening, even slightly later in the evening, offering dinner that goes along with it. Small things like that make huge impacts. So there's so much research to be spoken to, but a bottom line here is when you assume that the families will be engaged if the barriers to engagement are lower or removed, and the school knowing that they have a choice in that, that opens up curiosity around what are those barriers, finding out, talking to the parents, and then finding ways to engage the parents. It's that simple. Like, it truly does work to meet them where they're at, not where we expect them to be at or we perceive them to be at. Because when we assume that parents are disengaged from their child's education, it's a very limiting paradigm that makes us make choices based on a limiting paradigm.
Whoa. Okay. So we're talking about paradigms here. So I'm just going to say this in my own words, and maybe you can help me see if I'm following you correctly. So what you're saying is we come into this as an educator with a preconceived notion that they don't have time, there's barriers, and so then all of a sudden that's why they don't engage. And because we have this preconceived notion, it gets in the way of us almost finding the solution, because we just think they can't or they don't want to. And when we shift that paradigm, to believing that they can, if the circumstances are correct and they want to, then all of a sudden it almost like opens up the door more to
Yeah,
family
yeah,
engagement.
I think that's right. It's about the action though that I wanna make clear. It's not just them saying, "Oh, they actually wanna be engaged." It's what your mind does when you say, "Maybe it's us, maybe it's us, not them." Like, um,
Mm.
or maybe there's something I can do, or maybe my perception and their perception are different. Here's another paradigm to build on this. So it's not just opening up these opportunities, the way that that shift of the paradigms opens up opportunities to remove barriers by assuming that families would be engaged if they had the barriers removed. And our role as educators is to learn what those barriers are and help to remove them, right?
Mm.
So, I think a follow-up paradigm to that, though, is also broadening what we think engagement is. So, this other study that just really shifted how I was thinking about family engagement. Okay, so when you think about family engagement, what comes to your mind? Just like what activities would you say, "This is a family that's engaged?"
So, a family that comes to an event, like a play or,
Absolutely.
a writer's workshop, celebration of students' work, or something like that.
Absolutely, and that is what about 73% of teachers felt was family engagement. That and returning forms. So, like, they actually sign the form, they get it back to me, right? But what we lose there is, that's not actually engagement that shifts academic outcomes for students. Those are not the forms of engagement that get students to show up at school and not be chronically absent. Those are forms of engagement that are more sometimes like more compliance based, like based on the signatures, right? It's more have to do's, not like
Mhm,
engaging you in doing.
mhm.
Um, for families in this same study, what they found was that families feel like they're very engaged. And when the researchers looked at what they engaged with, what they felt was really engaging, they talked to their child about their future, right? So that is a big predictor. That's around like that academic socialization. They're having conversations with them about that. Um, and they are also helping them with homework, right? Like not all but like those were the top two ways that families feel like, well, I'm really engaged with my child's like learning. While a teacher, an educator might be looking at it going, they didn't sign that form. They're not
Right.
engaged.
Yeah,
Right. So
FaceTime, I wanna see you here.
right, right. But, they don't know that they work the 3rd shift and they're not able to be there during that
Mhm.
time or something. But when they do have opportunities, they're home helping with homework, they're reminding them, they're talking to them about their goals and things like that, and they feel engaged where it matters. And indeed, that is one of the most powerful ways, that it matters. But I'm getting ahead of myself getting into some of the practices, but yeah, I found that so interesting.
That was exactly where my mind was going was, okay, so if these are the paradigm shifts that, this is the way we're changing our thinking, what can we be doing differently, to boost family engagement?
Okay, I wanna talk about 2, that I've been excited about. So, okay, so it's based on this research. Yes, yes, this is me super excited about research. Okay, this study, it was done a few years back, and it looked at 50 different studies in family engagement. And they wanted to sort these best practices into 3 different categories. And the category to see, okay, we hear that these are like the main 3 that are really effective. Which of these is the most effective and, like, specifically why? So, the 3 were school-based involvement, so we probably understand what that means. So home-based involvement, like the homework help, things like that, and then the 3rd is academic socialization. So, kinda talked about the home-based versus the school-based involvement in the last thing that we were talking about with different paradigms about what engagement is. But that 3rd one, that academic socialization, that one I thought was really interesting. So, when they looked at all these studies, they found school-based involvement, had a weak to moderate association with achievement. I should say that is what this study was ultimately about, is like, what things was a family doing that actually shifted the students' like learning and achievement? Okay, so second, home-based involvement, it had it was kind of weird in the data because of some of what they looked at. In other studies, it was found to be very effective. But the big headliner for this one was academic socialization. So the strongest positive association with achievement was academic socialization. And that is, so it's this idea of, like, talking about school, linking learning and future goals. So as the parents engaging with their child and talking about, you know, how this is, impacting them or, like, what they wanna do with their lives, they can talk about how what they're doing in school, can help them with those goals. Any linkages like that really help to drive achievement. Um, but this is what so going to your question about the practice within it, it really gets at I think a lot of times there's this mindset about, helping a helping them to be compliant around, like, making sure they're getting things in, making sure forms are received, making sure homework is done, they show up with certain things. But what is most effective is helping to build the capacity, the awareness of parents and families. We find that time and time again, little small messages that go out to families that give them a little bit more knowledge about what they're doing and how they can do just a little step more, that's so helpful. There have been some studies on, like, even doing, like, small little coaching sessions that they send out, like, "Here's 3 things that you can try with your student. Here's what we're doing this term. Here's what we're doing. Here's 3 ways you can help at home." Building their capacity because you trust that they would do it if they knew how. And there is a huge disconnect there. It's a study I wasn't even going to talk about, so I don't have the numbers, but it was a huge disconnect between that as well, like, how much a teacher feels like they can share, like, "Oh, the family, they don't really wanna hear from me, they don't," and that is often confused based on, like, national data, but there's actually a lot of trust in individual teachers of their children. But, like, nationally, like, teachers get this sense that families don't trust them, but that is often, not always, but that is often the case, that a family trusts their actual children's teachers quite a bit, and they want more from them in their communication.
So, it's almost like a paradigm shift around what to communicate to parents when we communicate with them. So, is there anything that surprised you about what actually works? I mean, was this the thing that was surprising?
That was that was really surprising. What was also surprising to me was, as you're shifting the way you communicate, even small ways that the parents can be engaged, that two-way communication piece of this. So, making available to them times where they can, reach out, or giving, like, reaching out to them in a way that they can respond to, and it's not like a mass text that goes out or a mass email. Um, that even having the option to be able to respond to something, or being asked, like, one very simple practice, what's something that you feel your child has a strength in, that I should know about, right? Like, that, like, at the beginning of the year, any time of the year, I would welcome that any time of the year, for a teacher to ask me that. That it has a huge impact, that alone. So, it's some very simple way that they can respond and share something, then that also helps you leverage learning in the classroom as well. So, that was something that I found really interesting. Two-way communication is one of the most powerful practices, that has been studied recently.
So, one of the things that I'm wondering about is, in a time when so many teachers feel overwhelmed with all of the things they're asked to do, um, what I hear you suggesting is a form of deeper family engagement, which might, send off red flags like, oh no, it sounds like more that I have to do. Did you come upon any research that talked about the effort versus the payoff?
Um, yes, I think a lot of the research I've been speaking to, we think about this a lot, you and I, right? We are
Mhm.
thinking about that lens of, do not ask teachers to do more, unless, like, let's give them the most effective things, not more, right? So, and with that lens, looking at this research, I often felt that. I'm like, two-way communicate. Oh, great. So they're a middle school teacher, and now they're going to get 120 texts a week, right? Like, come on, dream on. Um, so what I saw come up time and time again in research reviews and things is, we are focusing and putting a whole lot of time towards the wrong actions, the wrong behaviors, that shifting those to other actions and behaviors will take less time. But so, for example, all of these, I'm not saying that all events are bad, that there are many events that are quite powerful. But for a teacher, like, if you're going to hold an event versus you're going to reach out to individual parents and share, here's what's going on in class, here's a way that you can help. Hey, here's something I noticed, a positive reach out. Those have exponential impacts on the family, on their ability to support learning at home, and that is one of the best ways to just really accelerate learning. So it's more effective practices, and in our handout, we will make sure to include more of those to show that time trade-off. So a lot of, also, the reactive, like, behavior, the reactive, like, needing to follow up and not catching students up who aren't showing up to class. We hear about that, the amount of time it costs the entire class to help chronically absent students, and how that makes all students fall behind. You start adding up all these ways. If more students are showing up because they feel a trust with the teacher, which is one of the most powerful ways to get them to show up, you know, that saves a lot of time. It is just more proactive, and they are ways that just look different than what we are used to. It is not the grand, more visible gestures. It is these reaching out. It is this consistency with it sharing and building relationships of trust with the families, taking down the barriers, meeting them where they're at. It sounds like a lot, but many of them are just, instead of holding it at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, it's holding it at noon on a Saturday, once a year or twice a year, different things like that based on the families in your community.
Well, I will say this, that as a former classroom teacher, educator, I know that a lot goes into planning events, right? I mean, there's a lot of time,
Mhm.
energy, and effort. And, I, for one, am leaving this conversation thinking, man, if I was still in the classroom, I think I would put a lot more effort into those individual reach outs. I mean, it would, so it's about choices, right? Like, do this, the event, or do this, the independent reach out, um, and go for the thing that gives you more bang for the buck. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is impact educational outcomes for students.
Right,
And,
right.
I
Yeah.
would want to do the thing that helps do that. And so sometimes it's about shifting the lens on what's important and what matters. And I feel like I would be really inspired. So I'm curious to know, listeners, what you've been inspired by. Is there one thing that you're going to try after this conversation? Drop it in the chat. Let us know. And beyond that, we'll see you again in a couple of weeks for our next episode of Change Starts Here Research Conversations. Thanks for joining. Like, subscribe, share, and share it with friends.
Franklin Covey Education is a trusted partner in developing leaders from the classroom to the boardroom in over 8,000 schools in over 70 countries.